Donald Trump can always walk away without really losing that much, whereas Putin going again without any deal with Donald Trump. I think his legitimacy in the Kremlin, in Moscow itself, will be under question, because obviously people are thinking that he is a mastermind of incredible 4D chess, which is not. So he needs to play some kind of game.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Professor Vlad Mykhnenko, Professor of Geography and Political Economy at the University of Oxford and author of the book The Political Economy of Post-Communism. Professor Mykhnenko, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Louis. Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be back.
Well, world leaders are preparing for this upcoming Putin-Trump meeting in Alaska. What are the key signs out of the Kremlin and the White House you'll be watching for in the run-up to this meeting?
Well, we definitely know that Vladimir Putin is going to Alaska, because he already said that, and also that he telephoned all of his friends, mates in the kind of dictatorial club of nations, but also BRIC nations as well, presumably to tell them that he's going to Alaska to make some kind of a deal, to progress or to de-escalate the Ukrainian war. So that's a fact that we know. We know that President Trump is going to Alaska as well. What we don't know whether President Zelensky of Ukraine will be going to Alaska, whether there is any role for him to play there. So that's an unknown, but presumably we will know in a couple of, or today, tomorrow, because going to Alaska from Ukraine is a long way. So he needs to start his journey pretty soon. So that's a plus. We also know that a lot of Russian pro-war kind of fascist Z bloggers are really unhappy about the meeting. There's a lot of crying about the betrayal of the Russian nation. They're worried about some kind of a ceasefire that they think will not be good to the Russian cause. So we know that as well. And obviously there is a lot of anxiety across the world about the meeting. I'm currently in Lithuania, and a lot of Baltic nations. There's a lot of anxiety here about what is going to happen. We know that a lot of local politicians already explained their opinion of Ukrainian involvement and the necessary for Ukraine to be involved in this potential peace talks. So there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of excitement, probably worry as well.
And so there are quite a few signs then that Putin is willing to take this meeting seriously, and it's not just a play for time. He may actually be discussing something along the lines of a de-escalation or ceasefire.
I think the signal of him calling Xi Jinping of China, Narendra Modi of India, Cesar Ramaphosa of South Africa, Lula da Silva of Brazil, plus all the Central Asian dictators, but not actually the dictator of North Korea or the leadership of Iran, strangely enough, probably a sign that he is planning to make some kind of an arrangement with Donald Trump. We don't know what that will be, but it is probably a somewhat more promising sign. Although, of course, we are still not sure whether Donald Trump will be able to get out, anything out of Vladimir Putin in Alaska.
And you mentioned that a lot of the pro-war bloggers and environment in Russia aren't happy about this meeting. Do you think Putin or anyone in the Kremlin will also be worried about Putin finally being sat down with Trump discussing this war?
I think one of your previous commentators this couple of days said that there's a lot of kind of a guerrilla warfare in the White House with different fractions trying to put some different spin on the Alaska deal. It looks like there is also kind of guerrilla warfare in the Kremlin as well. We've heard in a couple of days various rumors of senior officials saying that the war should be stopped and proposing some kind of a compromise. We know also that Z bloggers have a sort of feel on the ground of what's going on, and for them a temporary or unconditional ceasefire will be the worst case scenario. I think for Ukraine that will probably be the best case scenario, and an unconditional temporary / semi-permanent ceasefire probably will be the best thing for Ukraine if it happens. But I'm sure Vladimir Putin has a probably a couple of aces up his sleeve to play Donald Trump and to probably go for the minimum kind of agreement, which I presume will be sort of air and sea truce, which is more favorable probably to the Russians than to Ukrainians, given that Ukrainians have been hitting Russian oil refineries and also a lot of military weapon factories for last week, really successfully, with a lot of damage being caused. So at the moment, it looks like the air and sea truce is not really in Ukraine's favor, But probably that is the minimum that Putin will have to offer Donald Trump for the meeting, because otherwise that meeting will be a total disaster.
Yeah, and even just last night we saw another airstrike by Ukraine, or drone strike on a Russian oil refinery. There is clearly some benefit to Ukraine in being able to continue an air war, but it will presumably also benefit them that there may not then be these overnight strikes on major cities like Kiev if the Ukrainians, if Trump does agree with Putin to have an air ceasefire, as it were.
I think, we can discuss whether deliberate, indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas causes panic or strengthens the resolve. Right? We have a lot of talk about the Blitz spirit, not kind of breaking the British resolve back in the day, although it was about 40 odd days campaign. This has been going on for now 3.5 years. Definitely, a sort of ceasefire on the air probably would help Ukrainian local, the civilian population to kind of ease a little bit, because they're living in fear at the moment of dying every moment, given that the new improved Shahid Garan drones can fly at 550 kilometers an hour and can drop on you really fast, and there is hardly anything that Ukrainians can do to stop them, and hence there is a much enhanced risk of you dying at home, or not being able to reach the subway underground station on time, as my parents are doing currently in Kiev. So probably an air and sea truce may be of some benefit, although of course we know that Ukrainian hits on the oil refineries has caused quite a panic in terms of petrol prices in Russia, which are rising quite fast. And this is also the harvest season in which there is enhanced, obviously, demand for oil, for petrol and diesel and all other products. So I think the Ukrainian airstrikes are causing a lot of damage to Russians, but I presume Ukrainian leadership would agree on having an air and sea truce if it comes to that. If that's the only offer that comes from Alaska, probably they will have to take it, given that it's just still better than nothing.
And we talked about the back and forth inside the White House about what form this meeting should take. We've heard that Trump is still considering whether or not Zelensky should come to Alaska. Do you think there is still a chance that Zelensky will be at the meeting, and how bad does it look for Europe if he's not?
I would be extremely surprised. I would be totally surprised if Vladimir Putin would agree to meet President Zelensky, not in the Kremlin and not on his turf and not on his terms. Because we know very well he is not capable of withstanding pressure or being fast on his feet. I'm not saying that President Zelensky was fast on his feet during his scandalous meeting at the White House, but definitely President Putin would melt under pressure like that. So I'm sure if there is there's a slim chance, maybe 5% of a trilateral meeting in Alaska, it will be extremely choreographed. It probably will be just statements to the media. Or three of them will read out, a 5-page statement, and that will be it. I think that's probably, I would say, the most, of the least likely scenario, that's the most likely one.
And we talk about the concessions the US has made almost on behalf of Ukraine. Is this meeting itself something of a concession? Because does this work to almost start to reset Russia's position as a pariah state on the world stage?
I totally agree with you. I think it's a massive concession to Putin for not exactly, unknown reasons to us, because from a pariah, from somebody who was unshakable, not handshakable, until recently, he's managed to come back in 3.5 years, and now he's going to have a face-to-face meeting with the most powerful leader of the world. That is obviously something that Putin really, really wanted, and that's why he doesn't want Zelensky to come in and spoil the party of one-to-one, almost equal meeting between the superpowers, as Putin believes he is leading one of those. So that is quite a concern, and I think that concern is shared by a lot of nations across Europe. We've just heard a statement by the Baltic and Nordic nations, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland have made a statement that no agreement should be done without Ukraine. The territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity of any country should be obeyed. And also Europe, no borders can be changed by force in Europe. So it's not just Ukraine who's anxious. It's obviously a lot of its allies and also its neighbors are worried about that. And it's very unpredictable, as Donald Trump is. So we don't really know what's going to happen. But I presume Putin will have to give something, because otherwise Donald Trump will look really humiliated. And given that he wants to fill the media time with discussion of Alaska, not of Epstein files, of pedophile ring, he cannot come as a loser out of that.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask more about that, Professor Mykhnenko. Who needs an agreement to come out of this more, Trump or Putin? And how bad will it be for each of those two men if there isn't some sort of real conclusive agreement made on Friday?
Difficult to say. We all know that Putin is under pressure at home. The economy is doing pretty badly. A lot of his internal officials are secretly or privately saying that probably we need to make a deal with Putin. I think a lot of people think that he was very foolish to reject Donald Trump's extremely generous deal a couple of months ago, which gave away, all of the territories of Ukraine under occupation, which gave away Crimea, which gave away NATO membership for Ukraine. It was an extremely generous deal that Trump offered, and Putin refused that. So anything coming now will be less generous to Putin. But because I think the situation at home is becoming a little bit worried for him, that is why he's probably considering that it's better to go to Alaska to kind of pretend to be willing to compromise and at least to postpone some extra sanctions that may be coming. So I think Putin does need to go and give something in return to kind of ease some sort of the sanction regime, or at least not to deteriorate his situation even further. Donald Trump, probably can live without anything apart from obviously humiliation of not getting anything out. But he can lash out at Putin later on, right, and say, "Well, I tried, and these people are just insane, and hence it's not my fault." So I think Donald Trump can always walk away without really losing that much, whereas Putin going again without any deal with Donald Trump, I think his legitimacy in the Kremlin, in Moscow itself, will be under question, because obviously people are thinking that he is a mastermind of incredible 4D chess, which is not. So he needs to play some kind of game.
And you spoke a moment ago about the reaction to all of this in Europe, especially the concerns in Eastern Europe. We heard out of Poland, Donald Tusk saying that Putin must not be allowed to change borders with impunity. How concerned are those nations, the other nations near Ukraine and in the east of Europe that border Russia, going to be about the outcome of this meeting?
Well, they should be concerned because obviously Article 5 is kind of the question now with Donald Trump in the presidency. We obviously can see the US ambassador to NATO has been very hawkish and very sort of pro-Ukrainian in his statements and his official of the US administration. At the same time, I think people back in their mind are a bit worried about Article 5 and whether Americans will come to help Estonia or Lithuania or Latvia or any other country if there is a little intrusion. And hence that is a worry. We also have a lot of rumors, Louis, that Russians are building tanks, but they're not sending them to the front line, but they're stockpiling them for some other potential war, which I'm not entirely sure that is true. But the rumors probably are a sign of anxiety in Eastern Europe about Russians building up some extra stockpiles, perhaps to push from Belarus into Lithuania, probably the most obvious target, or potentially Estonia as well.
And there's also been this meeting in the UK over the weekend between the British Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Vice President J.D. Vance. Zelensky's head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, was also involved in that meeting, along with other European and Ukrainian security advisors. How crucial could that meeting prove to be? Because does that kind of give Europe the ear of the White House going into this meeting?
We don't know much what was said or happened afterwards. So we are just speculating on various announcements. I would take notice of J.D. Vance's announcement after the meeting that Americans is washing its hands and it doesn't need to pay for this war. If you're worried about the war, you're going to pay for it, which is kind of back to its original position, really, which is not as bad as you could fear, because obviously the worst position will be we are walking away and you just supply your own weapons, which Europe doesn't have. So if they're willing to sell weapons to Europe for them to be sent to Ukraine, even if there is no deal in Alaska, that is fine. but it doesn't really change J.D. Vance's and MAGA position on the war. So with all the talk about their religious and family links between the US, UK and US counterparts in that Tuning House encounter, it doesn't look to me that something really changed. It looks like actually they're back to the kind of their original position that Americans just want to go get involved, and Europeans obviously wanted to get involved.
So do you think J.D. Vance has been swayed at all in his view on Putin and Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
At the moment, I don't see any sign of that. His statement about we're not going to pay for this war, it was not our war, it doesn't look to me sympathetic to Ukraine. It seems to be back to J.D. Vance, 2 years ago or a year ago. He was writing for vice president and wrote quite an inflammatory column in the Financial Times saying exactly that. So I don't see he has been persuaded that much, although Ukrainians saying it was a productive meeting. So I'm not entirely, we're just reading the leaves, but I'm not entirely optimistic that something, will come out of it that is tangible.
And Zelensky has been meeting and speaking with several other leaders in Europe, Germany, Spain, and Finland, to name a few. What do you think Zelensky will be trying to discuss and get out of these meetings, and what should Europe be providing to Ukraine right now?
Well, I think we've had two quite successful half a billion each deals, armament deals, supplied by the US and paid by various European allies, and been sent to Ukraine. So I think that the scheme of Ukrainian priority list seems to be working well, or at least starting to work well. It could be a better even deal than the previous Rammstein conferences, in which everybody just chipped in whatever they could. This is a slightly better deal. So if European leaders are willing to continue, and if J.D. Vance agreed that is that's okay, if you pay for it, we'll send you whatever you want. That's probably the minimum requirement really for Ukraine to continue fighting. Otherwise, of course, it can't continue fighting just with drones that it produces, because there are lots of other things that it needs, and probably President Zelensky would want that to continue. Of course, he wants the Europeans to be quite resolute about no deals about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no deals about Europe without Europe. And it looks like I haven't heard any European leader, saying anything to the contrary. So it looks like Europe is quite united on that front. Europe and the UK and Norway and Iceland quite united on that front. So that's probably as good as it can get.
And so it is going to be crucial then that Europe are sticking by those pledges to provide weapons to Ukraine. How are the Kremlin going to be reading that European support, do you think?
Well, for them, it's quite difficult now, given that until Donald Trump's election, the Russian media, the Russian propaganda machine portrayed Europe as just a poodle of the US. The Uncle Sam was ruling everything, and the Europeans were just supplying, been sort of satellites, disenfranchised satellites, almost a colony of the US. Now it's they have to have a massive U-turn to say, well, it's actually US is fine, and just Europeans are Nazis and neo-Nazis, and all have grandparents who fought this way or the other. But that doesn't really land with the public generally. I've noticed a couple of opinion polls on various Russian Z bloggers asking about, what do we prefer? And one of the kind of most extreme channels, Telegram channels, had 64% saying, yeah, probably some agreeing with the US and finish the war. So even in the most sort of, rabid, chauvinist, fascist audience seems to be actually quite tired of the war itself. And hence there is probably an audience, and there is a sort of electorate in Russia itself that probably will be grudgingly happy to finish fighting, at least, if not the war.
And one of the key sticking points for Putin when the discussion around a ceasefire came in earlier in this year was this idea of European troops, be they some form of peacekeepers or support contingent, being on Ukrainian soil after a ceasefire was declared. Trump still hasn't said, that can't happen or won't go ahead. How worried do you think the Kremlin will be that will be the outcome of this, that in the next few years, if a ceasefire happens now, Europe can increase support and may even send troops to Ukraine, or the parts of Ukraine that aren't occupied by Russia? Well,
we know that both Britain and France are quite worried to send troops to Ukraine without US backing. we've heard them asking Donald Trump for support. President Macron asked for support directly during the televised meeting. Sir Keir Starmer asked for support during the televised meeting as well. Donald Trump said maybe not. You can do it on your own. Ukraine would definitely benefit from foreign troops, perhaps controlling the Ukraine-Belarus border and taking hundreds of thousands of troops closer from that, guarding that border to the front line, because there are 2,000 kilometers long kind of Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian border that Ukrainians need to kind of keep an eye on. So any help in Western Ukraine, perhaps, or on the border with Belarus, would be quite extremely useful, actually, for Ukraine. At the moment, we know that both President Macron and Prime Minister Starmer are worried about sending troops to Ukraine without some kind of explicit U.S. support or explicit U.S. defense guarantee of that side. So I'm not entirely sure that they've been persuaded to do that without U.S. But obviously, a lot of things can change after Friday, given the way things are going. So I'm not ruling it out, but I do feel they're quite worried about just being there on their own.
Well, Professor Vlad Mykhnenko, professor at the University of Oxford and author of The Political Economy of Post-Communism, thank you very much for joining me today on Frontline.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks a lot.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.